Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Christelle Rinn. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at HR Locker. So today what we'll be speaking about is we'll be focusing on really marrying the HR compliance side of things, but also with your best practice. So how do you focus on your compliance and your legal obligations, but also focus on ensuring your employee engagement is working, your employee satisfaction, and really just doing your best for your employees as well. So the topics that I'll be focusing on today will be, first of all, around GDPR, I suppose the cornerstone of what we base a lot of our compliance on. Also around the self-service side of things, so how you can focus on really empowering your employees around that side. The right to work, hopefully make that a little bit simpler for you and how to retain those documents in storage. Effectively managing your terms of employment. So in terms of the legislative side of things, in terms of contracts, things like that, when do you need to have them sent out, what you should be looking at, things like that. Bonus management and salary history, your benefits recording, and then we'll spend a bit of time on your reference checking and how to record them and how long you should be keeping and retaining them, things like that. As always, I really do encourage any questions that you have. The questions and answer section is there for you. I don't have Jenny with me today, but I do have Nikki with me who will be moderating all the questions. So at any time, if you have any questions, just pop them into the questions and answer section and I'll try to get to them throughout the webinar or certainly towards the end. If they are specific questions, I might have to refer them on to somebody, but please feel free to ask as many questions as possible. And I shall try to answer them to the best of my ability. So I suppose when we're talking about the HR excellence is what the webinar was called. And I suppose when we're talking about that side of things, what I like to focus on is we live in this world of compliance, but ultimately compliance shouldn't be the main driver for us. We do have GDPR legislation that's come in, and there is lots and lots of Irish data protection acts as well. But we have to kind of, I suppose, focus how does that actually affect us on a day-to-day basis in regards to managing our HR data. You're going to hear me talk a lot today about data minimization. So what does that mean and how should it affect you in terms of when you're actually storing your employee data? So I am very aware today that there are lots of people who are currently using HR Locker and other people who are using different HRISs. So I will try to make this as, I suppose, broad as possible. But I'll also spend a couple of minutes just showing you how you can do each of these things inside HR Locker if you are using it. And if you're not, how you should be doing this in your other HRS platform that you're using. So GDPR has been around for a very long time now. It's been in since 2018, and hopefully it's been embedded into our day-to-day lives in terms of how we manage our employee data. The very first thing that we need to be focused on is around what GDPR brought in around Article 5 and 6, which is how we actually process data. And employee data is personal data. So it's up to us in terms of the custodians of that data that we are storing it correctly, that we are only processing the data that we actually need. I would also say that in terms of your actual company policies and how you approach data as a company, you should be looking at the design by default, so privacy by design. So any of your policies or processes should be starting first around that privacy side of things, so that you are focusing on that data minimization, focusing on only having the amount of data that you actually need. So we live in a massively digital world. We have so much data on people, but a lot of the time, and we like to hoard that data, but a lot of the time we don't actually need it. So really focusing on, and this is what the GDPR legislation focuses on, is that what data do we actually require? Do you actually require it? And how long are you actually going to keep it for? So I suppose in terms of actions and what you should be focusing on when we're looking at that data, I would certainly say that you should, if you haven't done so already, audit the data that you hold on your employees. So audit data that you hold on current employees, audit data that you're currently holding on potential employees, and also those employees that have left, and decide why you're holding this data on them. Is there a legislative reason why you should be holding it? is there any reason why you're holding data on an employee who has left 15 years ago? So there is the data retention side of things, which, Nikki, I think you have a link to exactly how long you're supposed to be holding data for. So we have a link to a document on that side of things. So obviously from a legislative purpose, that's really important that you're ticking that box. But other things like, you know, if you're holding an address of an employee from 15 years ago, is there a specific reason why you're doing that? You know, don't just hoard the data. So do a quick audit on exactly the data that you have and regularly put in that review of the data that you have. So make sure that you're data cleansing constantly. And then in regards to investing in systems, so it's really important to realize that even if your employee data is not in a HRIS system, even if it's just paper-based, the GDPR Act it's still applicable. So you still have to store it in a clear way. So in terms of then I suppose the number one thing that we're asked constantly in terms of GDPR is where you're holding your data. So when you're focusing on deciding what system you're going to be keeping your employee data in, the number one question you need to ask is the data actually being held in the EEA? So you need to be focusing on that the data is being held within the EU and that it doesn't actually ever leave. And that also applies to if you're processing EU citizens' information. It doesn't just mean that if you're just employing them. And then in regards to if something terrible goes wrong and there is a data breach, you need to have a data breach response plan. Under GDPR, you have 72 hours to report it to the Data Protection Commissioner. However, you know, that's the maximum amount of time. So once the clock starts ticking, you need to put in your data breach response plan in place. You need to communicate to the employee what data has actually been breached, and you need to make sure that the breach is stopped so that you're stopping leaking information. And you don't have to wait the full 72 hours. You know, if there is on day one, if you've stopped the breach, employee has been, anybody who has been impacted has been informed, there is no reason to wait the 3 days to report it to the data commissioner. You know, just report it on as soon as it happens, and make sure that you've told everybody involved and that you've put your action plan in place and you've put your corrective actions in place as well. I suppose people are very afraid of reporting to the data commissioner. It sounds like something, you know, like you're being reported to the principal's office, but really what they're trying to see is that what was the impact of the leak, and what action plan have you actually put in place? And so that's really important, is that when you're going, that you actually have said that you've done it, you've corrected it, and there was an action plan put in place, and that you were doing the best of your ability to make sure that it was being kept safe. A lot of you, I'm hoping, have data protection officers, so make sure that your DPO is part of that data breach response plan as well. We use an external DPO here, who has been a great support to us, just even in regards to just asking questions. Make sure that we often do role plays of the data breach response plan, so we would implement them kind of 4 times a year, just to make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing if, God forbid, there is a data breach in place. So to make sure that your breach response plan is actually staying up to date constantly, which is really important. And I think definitely this data minimization, you'll hear me coming back to it constantly, is that just because we have access to the information doesn't mean we need to actually store it. Make sure you're minimizing what you're actually keeping on employees. So the next side of things is really around the self-service and your data management side of things. So under Article 15 of GDPR, employees have the right to access their information. So basically, Jack, who is your employee, has the legal right to ask you whenever he wishes to see what data you have on file about him. So this doesn't actually just stop in regards to him wanting to view the information. He can also ask to have it erased. Now, there is some caveats around that, in that he can ask for it to be erased, but obviously if you require it in regards to having to pay Jack for his wages, or maybe it's a leak, some legal things are going on, so you are legally required to retain it. So just because he asks for it to be erased, that doesn't trump the legal side of things as well. But then this, I think, really falls into that kind of HR excellency and best practice. that we need to focus on, that if an employee out of the blue is coming to ask you for their data, which you do have to give them, you do need to start communicating in terms of why are they looking for it? Has something happened? Is there a reason why they want something deleted? So just because there is that legislative piece in regards that you have to have access to it, you do need to focus on, has something happened? What was the actual reason why that stemmed this? Is there something that we can do to discuss something? Obviously you can access your data at any time, but what obviously there's a problem, and that's where I would say in terms of when you're looking at a HRIS platform, that self-service piece is really important. Because a lot of the time, I think this comes from a lack of communication, where employees don't know what information you have on file about them. Most of us have nothing to hide. It's really just a lack of communication, and it's the unknown. So if you have a HRIS platform in place, I'm just going to flick over here, that you have a place where employees can log in, see all the information that's actually retained in them on file, that they're able to come in and update their personal information as well, so that they're the holder of that information. So they're not, that you don't have 10 different addresses on file. They're keeping it constantly up to date. Again, down to that data minimization side of things, that you don't have old information that's not relevant, that you don't need to have, that the employee is in control of that data. And then they can also come here and access and see whatever data you have on file on them. The other side around emergency contacts and things like that, to make sure that they're keeping it up to date, that you don't have an old one on file, that you don't have, John's mother as the emergency contact when John has been married for 10 years. So just make sure that you're keeping it up to date, but that sometimes you can put that power back into the employee's hands to make your life a little bit easier, but also to stop any questions about, gosh, I wonder what the company has about me on file, or, I wonder, do they have stuff on file about me that I should know? So I do think from a HRIS platform side of things, make sure that for those obviously who are using HR Locker, there is a personal tab where people can go and see their information, and you can make all this information available to your employees. But you should be able to be kind of open and transparent with employees. You're not hiding anything. There is nothing to hide in regards to employees. In terms of compensation and benefits, presumably they know how much they're getting paid, their contract for employment, things like that. Very important though, when you're looking at in terms of the data management side of things, that you are really focusing on what your actual policies and procedures are in regards to data retention. So, for example, how long do you actually, there is specific legislative side of things of how long you're supposed to keep things for. GDPR recommends how long we should keep things for, but just to make sure that you have these in a guideline, in a policy of how long you keep things for, and a justification if they're kept kind of outside the realms of kind of what's norm, which is important. I mean, interestingly enough, I had a customer who they keep employee data forever, and my initial response was, "Oh, absolutely, you can't you're not allowed to do that. You have to delete it after a term, things like that." And they said, "Well, actually, we work with asbestos, so legally we have to actually keep employees' data forever, in case there is a long-term issue, or they need to report something, or there's a new they're kind of bound by health and safety legislation around that. So just make sure that if you're using asbestos or something like that, if it's something outside the realms of what's normal, that you have a policy and procedure explaining the reason why, which is important." So in terms of the right to work, I suppose we live in a world of a very diverse, multicultural workforce, which is great. It really adds to, I suppose, diversity and inclusion and creativity in the workforce. But with that does come managing work permits, managing work visas, and the onus is on both the employee and the employer. And it is something that we can't ignore. So in terms of, it's covered under the Employment Permits Act 2003-2014. So if somebody is working on a visa, then it is up to you to track that visa, to make sure that you have it on file. So you need to retain the permit, and you also need to make sure that that it's accessible by you. So at any stage, if you are audited, that you do have a copy of the permit on file. It is also up to you as an employer to make sure that it is up to date and valid. So again, I would certainly say if you're using a HRIS, I'll show you how we do it in HR Locker. We do have the right to work section over here where you can put in the different types of permits and visas, a copy of the passports, whether it's complete and up to date or whether it's incomplete, and when the next review date is. So at all times you have a copy of the record on file, whether it's what type of visa it is, whether it's a stamp 4 or critical skills visa, whatever is applicable, and that you're validated the record, but ultimately that you're notified at least 4 months in advance to say that it needs to be up for review, which is really important. And that's just here in the person's personal tab over here in the right to work section. And then what's really important is that there's so many different types of visas with so many different kind of categories and criteria around them, that if you do have somebody on a specific visa, that you are that you're, I suppose, making sure that they're in line, that they can do the work that you're getting them to do, which is very important. And that's there for a second. So in terms of effectively managing terms of employment, this is an area that I suppose I'm surprised with how many people aren't doing enough here. So under our Irish legislation, in terms of employment, you are legally required to issue a contract to somebody within 2 months of them starting to work. There's a legislative requirement. There is nothing that you can do about it. They require a contract if you are employing them as a member of your team. I suppose, and it's not just a formality. So I suppose there is things that have to be included in the contract, and we'll send a kind of a list in terms of what actually has to be included in the contract. But it is kind of, you know, your job title, nature of work, salary, your job description, when you're going to get paid, what the grievance issues are, and there is a pension rights, things like that, in terms of what's actually required in the contract. These need to be issued to the employees, signed and have on file. And there's certain things in terms of legislative wise that you just can't take out of the contract. For example, I had somebody ask me recently, can they take out the pension side of things out of the contract? And I was like, well, unfortunately, it is a legal requirement in Ireland that you're offering them at least a PRSA. You can't take it out. So just make sure that you have your employment contracts in place with employees. The other side of things, which I think is important to note as well, is that when you're changing your terms of employment with your employees, they've either got a salary increase, a job title change, job description change, job location change, any of those kind of things. If there is a significant change in the actual contract, that there is an amendment, addendum, something that is recorded to say that there has been an updated contract. If not, you can issue a new contract. So that's, I suppose, very important to note, that if somebody's got a new job description change or that there's a significant change in the contract, that there is an amendment issued or a new contract issued as well. The other thing which I would certainly, I could spend another 3 or 4 hours discussing, which we won't be discussing today, is that if you are changing terms and conditions in your employment contract, you can't just, you know, blatantly change them, unfortunately. You do need to get unilateral, you know, consent from employees. There needs to be communication around it, that, you know, you need to get consent to be able to do that. So just to make sure that, I suppose, from a basic requirement, when you are employing your employees, that you have their contracts on file. Nikki, if you can, when you get a chance, if you can paste, we do have a couple of contract templates in regards to permanent and part-time staff as well. That should give you a foundation for contracts, but to make sure that you just have them on file for people as well. It's one of the #1 reasons why people are fined through the WRC, and it is unfortunately kind of a basic requirement that you should be doing. I'm just have 2 questions here that I'm just going to pop over to. So the very first question is, what's the first step if there's a data breach reported to us? So from our side of things, the very first step from a data breach reported to us is we report it to our data protection officer. We need to find out how the breach happened, who it affected. You need to contact who it actually affected, and you need to put your response plan in place. So that would be the first thing, is to make sure that you've reported to your data protection officer and you're putting in place your data breach policy. Your action plan, rather, sorry. The next question I have here is, do I need to have all employee data saved online, or can it be paper-based info be used? So there is absolutely nothing saying that you have to have your employee data online. Lots of companies still have paper files for employees. The thing to remember is that GDPR does, and legislation obviously does, extend to your paper-based side of things. So it does mean you need to have them securely stored. It does mean that you need to make sure that only people who should have access to your employee folders have access to it. For example, if you have them in a filing cabinet that everybody in the whole company doesn't have access to the files, or for example, you need to make sure that you have fireproof filing cabinets, that if you're storing them locally on site, perhaps on your own server, that you've got a backup system in place. So yes, there is absolutely nothing saying that you need to store them online. In my opinion, I think it makes it a little bit easier, because in terms of all the backup and the security side of things is taken care of. But if you do have them on site, you just need to make sure that they're in a protective space, that there's limited access to them, and that you more than likely should have them in a fireproof cabinet, things like that, but specifically that nobody has access to them. And that you're doing the same thing in regards to data minimization, that you're not having things on that person's file on a paper way that are there from 15 years ago, when you don't actually need to have them on file anymore. That makes sense. And there's a question here is, I use HR Locker, but I don't have the right to work tab on the system. How do I amend this? Thanks. Oh, so Nikki, I see you responding to that. So yes, if you just get one of the team can get in contact with you, or you just contact support, and or just leave your details with Nikki, and somebody will get in contact with you in regards to that. But yeah, we can just turn that on. Okay. So the next side of things is bonus management and salary history. So a lot of this obviously is going to be managed through your payroll system. Under the Payment of Wages Act 1991, we need to make sure that employees understand how much they're getting paid, understand when they're going to be getting paid, and that if there are any deductions, that they are actually very visible to the employees, and that they're given this provision of wage statements so that they can actually clearly understand what the deduction reasons are, to, I suppose, really avoid any misunderstandings from an employee perspective. Excuse me. That is the legislation, but then let's bring it back into actually managing day to day. So from a basic wage perspective, you should be communicating to your employees. They need to know how much they're getting paid, whether they're getting paid monthly, weekly, fortnightly, whatever it is. And they need to have a very clear understanding of why there are certain deductions. I think sometimes the biggest misunderstanding from an employee perspective is, even in regards to if you're paying somebody's health insurance, that all of a sudden there's a benefit in kind deduction made, and the employee wasn't aware that there was going to be a benefit in kind. They don't really understand why there is the deduction being made, and a lot of this can be helped, I suppose, if you're actually communicating to your employees and really explaining the reason why these deductions are taking place. And most of the deductions are probably going to be tax-based. So, your USC or whatever it is. So make sure that you're actually communicating with your employees. So most employees wouldn't have access directly into their payroll system. Obviously, they get a pay slip. But in terms of your actual, I don't think I have it open here. In terms of your, sorry. Just continue. This is what happens when you do it live. In terms of what actually happens when you're in your HRIS system. So employees can't actually get access, obviously, to your payroll system, but you should have a comps and bends section here. And this is ours in HR Locker, where the employee is able to see their salary history, how much they get paid, the interval. So, you know, how many are getting paid per hour per month, whatever it is. Bonus potential. So, for example, if you've agreed with somebody that their bonus potential could be, they could earn 20,000 euros this year, but how much have they actually earned? When was it paid? The payroll payment. So which payroll payment was it in? Who actually registered it? Was there any notes? For example, maybe somebody thought that their bonus was going to be 3,000 euros. They're actually only getting 2,000 because maybe they didn't hit a certain KPI or target, things like that. It's important to be communicating that constantly out to people. And any benefits. So I think in regards to benefits, one of the reasons I like this side of things a lot is sometimes employees don't actually understand or visually see the cost of the benefits that a company is giving them. For example, if they have a phone or a laptop or even insurance or anything that you're giving to employees, there is a cost to the company for that. And so this is a nice visual way for people, for employees to understand the actual benefits package that they have, and the actual cost. So the you know, you can put in your health insurance, any notes in regards to the benefit in kind may be applicable to this, or obviously is applicable to that in regards to health insurance. From a company reporting perspective, you can put in your cost center and then your payroll payment ID here as well. So like I said, obviously the employees usually won't have access to the actual payroll system. They'll get their payslip, which they will more than likely look at and go, I don't understand why this is like this. But if they have access to a nice comps and bends page to be able to look through, understand what they're getting, when they're getting, and why there are any deductions that have actually been made, I think is a nice way to do it. So I'm just going to have a look at some questions here now. They're distracting me while I'm looking at them. So I have one. Do I need a full copy of the contract on file, or will a letter stating they have received terms and conditions be okay? So you do need the full contract on file, because if you are ever audited, they're going to look for the contract. So it is probably the number one thing that they're going to look at in regards to, if you ever are going to the WRC in regards to an audit, hopefully you never have to, they're going to look for the copy of the contract on file. And having a letter saying they received it probably won't cut it. You need to have the full copy on file. Okay, sorry, I just see another one there. That's perfect. Okay, so yes, so the next slide here again is around the benefits recording. So a lot of the time, the miscommunication around benefits is that what actually gets, what has benefit in kind and what doesn't have benefit in kind. So I definitely think you need to start with in regards to educating your employees that a lot of the time benefit in kind is not something that you can actually control. It's a tax, and maybe the employee might decide, well, you know what, the benefit in kind to me is too costly, so I actually won't take the health insurance or the car benefit in kind or whatever it is. But make sure that you're having those open conversations with employees. I think a lot of things can be avoided if you're actually sitting down with employees and actually explaining the reasons why you were doing things, and why things are happening, to make sure that they have regular updates in regards to benefits. Make sure that they can go to a central place. I know if you're doing Irish Life or VHI, that they have a location where they can go in and check on their pension, or go in and check on whatever documents that require. And if you don't have an online access for those side of things, that you can just you can upload them here in regards to that they're all in one spot for somebody, and they can actually understand why they're getting those deductions in place. The next slide I'm going to talk about, which often is asked from us a lot, is in regards to reference checking and recording references. So this is covered under GDPR, and it is around that data minimization side of things. So why are we actually keeping references? What is the recommendation side of things? So it's covered under Article 6 and 7 under GDPR, and consent here becomes paramount. You cannot, before reaching out to references, you need to have clear permission to do so. and that is covered under GDPR. You cannot just go and contact them without the permission of the candidate. So in terms of references, you need to get permission first, and then storing of references, obviously important in regards to if you're being audited. But for example, in regards to the candidates who have not been successful in the job, there often questions, I suppose, how long do you store those references for? So recommendation would be between 6 to 12 months, depending on so 6 to 12 months, unless somebody has come and asked, they're bringing a legal proceeding against you to think that there's been an unfair reason or something like that, then obviously you retain them for longer. But you keep them for that 6 to 12 month period to ensure that if, for example, a candidate ever comes and says, I was unfairly treated, I didn't get the job based on discrimination grounds or whatever it is, that you're able to say, well, here's the records that I have. You know, it would be in terms of your policy says you keep them for 6 months. This is a record I have that says that I chased your references and they weren't great. This is the reason why I didn't get it, etc. But it is important that there is a time period on the references. You should not have references on file from somebody who applied for a job 3 years ago. Make sure that you do have that company policy around it. And that really comes back down to, like a broken record with the data minimization side of things, is that you need to decide, what do you want on file? You know, why do you have a reference on file from 5 or 6 years ago? That person has probably changed jobs. That person is probably going to give you another reference if they ever do go through the recruitment process with you again. So make sure that the information that you have is constantly updated and relevant, I suppose. The next side of things, and also very important actually, is that you are protecting. It is a sensitive data. It is not something you write in a book on your desk. It is something that is stored in a sensitive way because it is sensitive data. Excuse me. The next side of things is in regards to when you actually employ the person and the references that remain on file. So again, I'm going to talk about data minimization here. For example, when we're ISO 27001 and ISO 9001 audited, and as part of that, when we are audited from a HR perspective, we need to show what reference checks we did for employees. But this comes down to how much information do you actually need to store after 4 or 5 years on an employee. So I'm just going to show you here within the HRIS system, there is the reviews and ref section here. There's references where you can store the amount of information that you require. So from my side of things, in regards to this person, I can see the company that was contacted, who did the contact, what position they had, who it was checked by. I can see a little note here to say what the note was. You know, they worked here for 3 years and what's actually relevant here. But, you know, it's important, for example, in terms of company policy, that I need to be able to show that we follow because we hold secure information, that we do a very thorough reference check on people. So it's important for us as a company to be able to have that policy and procedure in place to show that references are actually kept on file. So I'm just going to quickly look at a question here. If you have a long-term employee beyond 5 years, should you still keep references or delete them? So again, this comes back down to the reason why you're actually keeping them. For example, like I just said, we are ISO audited, and when we show our process, they'll pick a random employee to show what did we actually do it or not? Did we actually check them? What is important is the data minimization side of things. So how much information do you need to keep on somebody from 5 years ago? You probably don't need to keep that. Jack worked in this place for 6 years and spoke to that person and liked to have a good night out. That information is no longer relevant. The basic information of that, I contacted Jack's manager, this is where they worked, and confirmed. That's it. That's about it. That's about enough. So is it okay to only do phone references and not have a written record? So again, this is totally up to your own policy. From my side of things, again, within HR Locker, in terms of references, because we are ISO 27001 audited and 9001, we need to prove that we're following a process. So it is our company policy to have written records of references to show that we've actually followed that process. So that side of things, that's the reason why we do it as a company. If in your company that you're phoning people and you're just keeping reference, that you've taken the reference, then that's your company policy. I would just put a caveat on that to say that in regards to if somebody was to ever legally come and say, well, I feel like I was negatively discriminated against because of that reference, you don't actually have any record of what was actually spoken about. It becomes a he said, she said. So I would recommend that you have a written reference of it. Are you obliged to do a reference check? No, it's industry specific. I mean, from our side of things, like I said, I think it's best practice. I think you should be referencing people. I think that it is, I think it's best practice. And I think that it is a good practice to get into in regards to showing that you actually have a process to make sure that people who are dealing with sensitive information are reference checked. So I would definitely say from a sensitive information perspective that you are referencing people, and I do think it's best practice as well, which I think is important. So I think that kind of comes to the end of our webinar. I really appreciate everybody's questions and hope you guys have found it informative. There's a couple of questions there in regards to kind of turning on the right to work section within HR Locker. And so if you are looking for that, please just come. I think you've turned it on for a couple of people who have asked, or just come and speak to somebody, your account manager or whoever's in support, and they can look at it for you. There is also, don't think I have it turned on here. Yeah, there is also another section here that may be applicable to people in regards to the background checking. So if you are background checking people as well, I don't have it turned on here, but if you are background checking people as well, that you can retain that information and file and put in kind of notifications, or if you're doing any GARDA vetting or any background check like that, that you can keep it on file, and if it has to be kept up to date, this is kind of the same as the right to work side of things. There is also a nice section here on the side, which is the pension opt-in thing, which I bet I don't have turned on for anybody. Yeah, and there's also a pension opt-in side of things if you want to get people to opt in for the pension as well. There is a question there just in regards to the PRSA side of things. So has that been brought into Ireland? So so I'm not sure if you're referring to the opting in. So in terms of opting in, has not actually been brought into Ireland. It is in the UK. They have said they're going to bring in the opt-in pension for the last 2 or 3 years. I think it's supposed to be live. So it's supposed to be, I think, in for 2025. But you know, it keeps being pushed out in terms of PRSA. Your company does need to provide access to a PRSA to employees. What if a previous employment checks are completed by a vetting provider? Should I still complete reference checks? No, if you're using a vetting provider, then you know, you would use them as reference checks. They should be valid. Again, it's up to your company policy of what you actually want to retain on file. So thank you everybody so much. I hope that was useful. Nikki will send you out a copy of the recording. And if there are any questions or any feedback, I always love to hear that. But thank you so much, and hope to talk to you all soon and see you again next month. Take care.